Hey there, buddy, what's that sound? Hey there, buddy, what's that smell? It's Peteys Pedz.
Rock and roll!
Welcome back to Peteys Pedz EP04, the Electro Harmonics Big Muff Pie. What do the Carpenters, the Black Keys, 311, Jimi Hendrix, Dave Gilmour, Ben Folds 5, Bush, The Cows, Depeche Mode, Dinosaur Jr., Flipper, Grand Funk Railroad, Metallica, Misfits, Mudhoney, Muse, Nirvana, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Santana, 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 Sonic Youth, Santana, Smashing Pumpkins, U2, The White Stripes, Wolfmother, Robert Fripp, Santana, Kool and the Gang, and Korn have in common? Why, they have all utilized the Electro Harmonics Big Muff. Going back to 1969, just 2 short years after the Summer of Love in San Francisco, Mike Matthews and his partner Bob Meyer cooked up the first Big Muff on Perfboard, just like you or I might put a pedal together today. Matthews, a rock and roll keyboardist and recent Cornell graduate, has gotten his start manufacturing Foxy Lady pedals for Guild, which in its original form was a near copy of the Moss-Rite Fuzz-Rite, itself an alleged ripoff of the Rhodes Fuzz, designed by one session player named Red Rhodes. Matthews and Company altered the design to what we now know as the Big Muff and switched up the Foxy Lady design to accommodate that. Soon after, Electro Harmonics branded muffs hit the scene and the company has never looked back. In '69, Electro Harmonics was already selling something called the Muff Fuzz, or Muffled Fuzz circuit, which was a mild overdrive circuit in an LPB1 box. I wanted to come out with a 3-knob distortion unit in a bigger box. I asked my buddy, Bell Labs designer Bob Moyer, to design a unit that would have a lot of sustain. When I got the prototype from Bob, I loved the long sustain. This was done by cascading the circuit into additional sections, each one clipped by twin diodes. However, when you clip, the tone can be a bit raspy. So I spent a couple of days changing capacitors to roll off the distortion in the highs. And eventually, I found that the best long sustaining tone that was a sweet violin-like sound was done by having 3 capacitors in different parts of the circuit rolling off that rasp. We plunged into production. I brought the very first units up to Henry, the boss over at Manny's Music Store on 48th Street in New York City. About a week later, I stopped by Manny's to buy some cables, and Henry yelled out to me, "Hey Mike, I sold one of those new Big Muffs to Jimi Hendrix." An earlier Electro Harmonics pedal, the Axis Fuzz, was also manufactured for Guild Guitar Company as the Foxy Lady. It used a similar chassis as the early Big Muffs, but it had a simpler 2-transistor circuit. With the introduction of the Big Muff, the Axis was discontinued, and the Foxy Lady pedal became a rebranded Big Muff. It was available at least until the mid-70s. The Big Muff Pie was the first overwhelming success for Electro Harmonics' line of pedals. Due to its reliability, its low price, and its distinctive sound, the Big Muff sold consistently through the 70s and was found in innumerable guitarist pedal collections, such as David Gilmour and Carlos Santana. Although Santana owned one, it is reported that he did not use it. David Gilmour famously used the Big Muff on Pink Floyd albums Animals, The Wall, and most recently on his 2006 On an Island tour. Other artists who used the Big Muff during the 70s include Thin Lizzy, Kiss, Frank Zappa, although Frank Zappa had it modified to produce some very non-typical Big Muff style distortion, Ronnie Montrose, and others. Even after the Electro Harmonics company was forced out of business in 1982, the pedal remained in such demand that clones of the Big Muff were made by both competing corporations and independent pedal builders, and demand for vintage Big Muffs rose. Unsurprisingly, when Mike Matthews restarted Electro Harmonics in the 1990s, the Big Muff was one of the first pedals he reintroduced on the market. The sustained grind of the Big Muff was later an integral part of the sound of many alternative rock bands through the 80s and 90s, being used extensively by the Smashing Pumpkins, Dinosaur Jr., NoFX, Bush, and Mudhoney. The name of the pedal even inspired the title of Mudhoney's 1988 debut EP Super Fuzz Big Muff, as well as Depeche Mode's 1981 instrumental Big Muff. Lee Ranaldo and Thurston Moore of Sonic Youth used a Savtech version of the Big Muff, and more recently Dan Auerbach of the Black Keys, who often uses the Savtech version in a number of his Black Keys songs. Aside from the Big Muff, Electro Harmonics has made Nano Muff, the Metal Muff, which has a 3-band EQ and is a distortion. The Little Big Muff is a smaller variant version of the current NYC model. The Deluxe Big Muff, the 77/78 op-amp Big Muff, designed by Howard Davis, which uses integrated circuit chips to create the fuzz, whereas all others except the Deluxe Big Muff use transistors. Most versions of the Big Muff use 4 transistor stages. The first is a clean boost, which drives the next 2 clipping stages, which create the distortion. The final stage is the tone recovery stage, which recovers volume loss, as the tone stack in the Big Muff is passive. The pedal loses some volume because of this. For a short time in the late 1970s, Big Muff used op-amps, or at the time they were not highly regarded as the discrete transistor versions. However, the op-amp or IC Big Muffs have lately seen a revival among collectors and players alike. The IC op-amp Big Muff has a slight variation in sound to the transistor version. It's not as scooped and it seems to cut through more in a band situation, which is desirable among some. Electro Harmonics also released a large box version of the Big Muff known as the Deluxe Big Muff Pi. This version included an onboard compressor in addition to the standard Big Muff features. It was available in 2 versions, one with a blend switch and another with a series/parallel switch. Electro Harmonics themselves have joined the fray of reissue version of their original Big Muff Pi, as well as a smaller Little Big Muff Pi that incorporates true bypass switching, surface mount components, and a smaller enclosure. Since that fateful day in 1969, nary a pedal has been copied more times or tweaked as much as the EHX Big Muff. With over 30 documented variants under its own name, the Big Muff is one of the most modified circuits in history, with many mods part of the official EHX Muff canon. Unofficial names abound in the Muff story lineage. The aforementioned Perfboard Muff is colloquially known as such because it was built on pre-perforated circuit board. The Triangle Muff is named because of its knobs form a triangle shape. Ram's Head and Violet Ram's Head stem from the EHX company logo, found on the bottom right corner, the latter because of the print color, and many more iterations exist that followed the company throughout its history to Russia and back. While we might view pedal clones as a newer phenomenon, cloning actually existed even back in the 60s. Mossrite ended up having the contents of the Fuzzrite encased in a solitary integrated circuit by Sprague. The first tone bender is a modified Maestro FZ1. Big Muff is certainly not immune to cloners, getting its first bite in 1972 by Jordan Electronics, with the ironically named Creator. Many other companies followed with several notable entries: the Ibanez 850 Overdrive, Maxon DNS, Elka Superfuzz Sustainer, used by Wata of Boris and a slew of others, companies like Sakova, Lyle, Marveltone, Gen, and many, many more. Typically in the late 70s and early 80s, when the digital gear was first being ushered in on a silver platter, a lot of people got rid of their classic effects and bought multi-effects. That may have proved to be a mistake for a lot of people, as they sold stuff for really cheap. A lot of those classic effect pedals are gone. They're all in Japan now and fetching very high prices. So at the time, with digital being the latest thing, Matthews and Electro Harmonics actually closed up shop in 1982 because pedals were really unhip at the time, where rack mount gear was what was happening. So 9 years later, things kind of started turning back around, and Mike Matthews resumed operation in Russia, offering the Red Army overdrive and then continuing on with several more iterations of the Big Muff with a litany of different paint jobs and enclosure sizes. Just like other Big Muffs, the value and collectability followed the timeline of neutral, low, and high. So soon players began to ask for Russian versions by unofficial names such as the Civil War, the Green Russian, and the Black Russian versions, with several sub-names in each category. Gee, the Big Muff, that's such a wide net that one casts when one says those two words. Each one of these can be brought to prominence by different famous musicians who favored one version above all others. Many guitar gods are privy to their certain version, while Jay Mascis of Dinosaur Jr. claims any muff made after the Ram's Head version are fart noise, something he actually very animately said to a writer during his time in music retail. However, Pink Floyd David Gilmour chose the Civil War version above all else for the Division Bell album and tour. Dan Auerbach of the Black Keys and Stephen O'Malley of the drone collective Sun O prefer the Green Russian above all to others, despite playing drastically different types of music. The first well-known recording using a Big Muff ended up being cut by the Carpenters, a song called Goodbye to Love, featuring a triangle Big Muff that's supposedly to be the hairiest of all renditions, that found itself mashed in the gears of Richard and Karen's soft rock machine. With so many players across so many genres playing one, it can be tough to nail down the sound of the Big Muff. And some people won't even consider it a fuzz, though Matthews himself says that it is. Its core sound would be that of a harmonic sustainer, as Matthews designed the double clipping stage with violin-like sustain in mind. The Muff supposedly works best when fed into a clean, high headroom amp, as its punishing output volume can work its best mojo in this arrangement. The Muff also stacks amazingly well, pairing up with almost any overdrive or distortion pedal to stellar returns. The result is always different when the Muff and another pedal do battle, and guitarists have used this unpredictability to great effect in the last 60 years. In the present day, modern builders have paid great homage to Mike Matthews' wonderful Big Muff circuit, with several well-known companies getting their big break, as it were, with their Muff-esque offerings. Pedals such as Earthquaker's Hoof and Black Art's Toneworks Pharaoh acted as a trebuchet for the careers of such companies, and other products such as Big Tone Music Brewery Royal Beaver and JHS Muffaletta have taken the circuit to absurdly opulent ends. Because there exist hundreds if not thousands of Muff interpretations, with more being built all the time, it's safe to say that the Big Muff is an enigma. There is simultaneously much like it and nothing like it. My personal experience with this pedal, I have a long and storied past. When I first started playing guitar, I had a hollow body, just a junker guitar, and no pedals, but I did have a small Silvertone 2-knob practice amp with a 6-inch speaker. A good friend of the family, who was about 18 years old, showed up knocking at my door. He had found Jesus and wanted to get rid of his guitar, his rock and roll accessories. He had a box full of Electro Harmonics pedals, a Muff Fuzz, a Screaming Tree, a Small Stone phase shifter, a Morley Wah Wah pedal, and a Big Muff. a bunch of leather straps and a bunch of cables. Praise the Lord, he dropped that stuff off at my doorway, so I was able to set up a rudimentary pedal board and real quickly realized I needed a better instrument. So I got myself a Memphis brand Les Paul copy, and I was off to the races. Now that Big Muff stuff with me, I ended up picking up an IC Muff later on. I've had 3 Big Muffs. I gifted one. I had another one disappear on me, and I am left with a transistor version, which is absolutely wonderful. And that pedal, I had mounted it on a pedal board with a Roland or a Boss PS120 power supply, single power supply that powered 3 pedals, being an Arion bass EQ I had set at a mid scoop, and then a Dodd bass chorus that I set to nil rate, and that was my bass tone I used on guitar for many recordings with that mid scoop, and it didn't faze me. I liked the way it sounded with the mid scoop. People say, oh, you can't palm mute with a Big Muff. Well, I did whatever I wanted and it didn't bother me, and you can hear that tone on all of my early recordings. Eventually I got really sick of using that, and I kind of grew to loathe the Big Muff tone. So I used one for many years. I say I had mine set pretty much with the sustain at about 3/4, same with the tone and the volume, about the same way. And I used that with single coil and humbucker pickups. I didn't particularly use mine as a fuzz sound. It's more of an all-around distortion. The Big Muff is kind of a too much type of effect. And for me, building clones, I had bad luck building a clone. I threw together a PCB that did nothing more than oscillate when you cranked it all the way up. So I experimented with all sorts of different types of transistors, and I came to the realization that the gentleman who had designed this, it was a bad layout. It was merely that the locations of the transistors were too close together. Because I had troubleshot this circuit endlessly, and it was built because someone requested. They said, hey, I want you to build me a Big Muff. And then, of course, I had never done one because I loathe this circuit. I really don't like the Big Muff because I overused it. So personally, my experience of building one was not good. And I would generally, as a rule of thumb, if you asked me, if you were like, hey, build me a Big Muff, I would probably, unless you were going to pay me for my time, if I was going to get a good wage for, considering like not working for free or me having to pay for you to get a pedal, which usually is the case. People want to give you $30 for you to spend 2 weeks of your life working to build them something, and then paying parts and shipping to several different suppliers. $30 doesn't even cut the parts. But yeah, I wouldn't want to build a Big Muff, and that's just simply because I've been there and done that. And my opinion is that they're available so cheap, secondhand. You can find them from usually around $65, and go ahead and just purchase one. As far as mods go, there's all kinds of different variations on it. The Vic Audio Big Muffs, I really like what he's done with the mid-selector switch, where you have a 3-position switch being mid-range stock setting where it's scooped, and then the next selector up is flat mid-range where you're not losing any of your mid-frequencies, and then with the switch set to the top, it's actually boosting the mid-range frequencies a bit. Something not unlike what you see with a tube screamer pedal. So I would recommend those Vic Audio, or any Big Muff that has that sort of a mid scoop is compensated for. I really like that idea. As far as building these, like I said, I don't really recommend that. I would say this is more of a pedal that you're gonna be getting used. They do stack really well. Combining it with a tube drive, like David Gilmour does, he puts a tube booster in front of it. So these stack very well, and you can get all kinds of great classic rock timbres. People have used this pedal on all sorts of recordings, and it's very flexible. But like I said, it's just one of those pedals that has been there, done that for me. It's a way too much pedal, in the essence that it's just kind of like a lot of your articulation goes away when you're playing through the circuit. This is just me personally, how I feel about it. I'm sure you can set things a little differently, and there's ways to improve this, but I found it was just like too much with the Big Muff. Again, fantastic for bass. I would recommend, they have these circuits where you can have a bit of your clean signal blended in. That would be awesome. You're going to use a Big Muff on bass. Big Muff sounds wonderful on bass, but it kind of knocks your low end out. So if you could use some sort of a circuit, a parallel blend to blend in a bit of your clean tone, something like, I forget what they're called. I have one here. I built it from a PCB, from Guitar PCB, and it's a parallel channel blend that people use for bass effects and a fuzz. That works really wonderfully well. So while it's a love-hate relationship with the Big Muff Pi for me, I can't really say that I recommend it, but I can't really say that I don't recommend it, because it's such an unbelievably tried and true installation in rock and roll. So you take the good with the bad. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you learned a little something. I'm Petey Twofinger. These are my Pedz.
Hey there, buddy. What's that sound? Hey there, buddy. What's that smell? It's Peteys Pedz, Peteys Pedz.